Welcome to the Daily Beef, the wide receiver edition. This is week 2 in NFL DFS. I'm your host, Josh Galacci, with Adam Pfeiffer. We're going to be talking about wide receivers today. But before we do that, I want to make sure that everyone goes over to rosters.com and checks out a beautiful bonus they have. An initial deposit of $10 can get you 20 instant bonus dollars. That's huge. That's only on your initial deposit, so please take advantage of that. But it's week 2. It's wide receivers, Adam. I think we should just hop right into it. I know we talk a lot about we did some quarterback stuff. We're going to have some other stuff coming along as well. You can watch the running backs. We'll probably talk about some tight ends, tons of articles we have coming up on RotoCurve. But week 2, wide receivers, let's jump right into it. I know this is a big week for them, so who's your top 3?
Yeah, ever since I started writing, I pretty much have had this rule where when AJ Green's facing the Steelers, I just write him up and play him, and I'm going to continue that trend this week. He is just the stone cold lock for me this week. He might be my top overall play at any position. I think he's so safe. You look at what he did against them last year, 17 for 202 touchdowns in 2 games last year. In 2014, he went nuts against them. The Steelers secondary is very bad. In their last 17 games, the opposing number 1 receiver has had either 100 yards or a touchdown in 10 of them. That 10th game being Deshaun Jackson on Monday night, who went over 100 yards. Probably would have had an even better game if Cousins wasn't so bad. I just think A.J. Green, even when the Steelers had a decent defense and decent corners, he was still lighting them up. So now that they're really lacking in that department, I think with the target share that he's going to see, he saw over 50% of the targets in week 1, probably going to see at least a 30% target share the entire season, especially with Eifert out. I just think A.J. Green is an absolute lock for, at least I think 7 for 100. Could easily score in this game. I think the Bengals are going to struggle to run the ball. Pittsburgh's run defense is pretty solid. It has been since the beginning of last season. So A.J. Green is clearly the top guy for me. I'm going to have him a lot, and I'm going to be all over him.
We're going to talk about A.J. Green and Odell here shortly, but I just wanted to mention my top guy is Odell. We're definitely going to have a little bit of a beef. There's no doubt between who the top receiver is this week, but for me, I think Odell is going to be my top guy. We'll talk about that more later, but basically, there are guys that can guard him. Delvin Breaux is out. He's going to be out for the season for the Saints. So the one thing about that offense is it's going to run through Odell. They're going to pass a lot. They're going to have a great matchup against this Saints team. And for me, despite the fact that he may be 60% owned or more, I have to have him. Adam, who's your number 2 guy? I know a lot of guys are going to look for number 1, but number 2 and number 3 is where people are going to make their money this week. That's for sure.
Yeah, I think you're right, especially with, it's hard to find a number 2 this week because there's a lot of guys who you're not as comfortable with. Obviously, Keenan Allen's on IR. Other guys are in tough matchups. So I'm going back to the well with DeAndre Hopkins here. I love him in tournaments kind of the rest of the season because everybody's going to be on Julio, Odell Beckham, and Antonio Brown, the big 3. I think A.J. Green has kind of surpassed Hopkins as the number 4 guy at least. So Hopkins is going to be really interesting in tournaments throughout the season. Wasn't the most targeted Texans receiver in week 1, but he still had a nice game, found the end zone, and I think he can do it again this week. I think I'm going to take the over on this total right now, which stands around 43 points. I think it's a little bit higher scoring than that. I think the Chiefs' offense you can exploit right now. Their corners are very inexperienced. Their pass rush isn't the same without Justin Houston. And I think Marcus Peters is a little overrated. He gets a lot of interceptions, but again, it helped when Sean Smith was doing a lot of the work last year. Now teams are starting to go at him. I think Hopkins could easily have a very good game here. Not many people are going to be on him because of the lower total, plus the fact that people would rather spend up. He's 8,700 on DraftKings, so you can spend 500 more and go to Julio. A.J. Green's only $200 more. So Hopkins in tournaments is really interesting to me for this week and pretty much for the rest of the season.
It's interesting that he's a tournament play because last year rather, he was one of the top cash game plays each and every week with all the targets he had. But when you look at tournaments, that's what you want. You want guys that have the potential to outscore guys in their price ranges at a lower ownership, and that's exactly what Nuke Hopkins can do for you each and every week. Like you said, Marcus Peters, rookie year, I think he had something like 40 or 50 yards a game average in the first couple games, but it's something I know for sure. He gave up 9 touchdowns. That's not a low amount, especially for a guy that was titled as the next shutdown quarter. So a guy like him is one of those matchups where you can see, oh, you know what, it's top corner. Doesn't matter. Marcus Peters does allow touchdowns, and it's not like he's one of these guys that can just lock down anyone, let alone DeAndre Hopkins. But
Ronald Darby should have won Defensive Rookie of the Year. Don't at me.
Yeah, well, he's a Buffalo Bill corner. We can see why you like him, right? Now, my second guy this week is Alshon Jeffrey, and I think he's going to be one of these guys that's lower owned. I mean, the reason why, Adam just alluded to it. There's a lot of guys in the middle of that price range in the 8,000 and 7,000s that are worth using. But the thing with Alshon, he goes against Nolan Carroll this week. The Eagles have a good front seven. They have 2 good safeties, Malcolm Jenkins and McLeod. They just signed from the St. Louis Rams. These corners are not very good. We saw it last week. Nolan Carroll was beat deep twice, maybe 3 times by Terrell Pryor, depending on how you look at that last pass, which was underthrown and Pryor adjusted to it. The problem is Carroll gets beat deep. That's just the way it works. It happened last year. It happened 2 years ago when he was with Miami. He struggled on deep balls as well. That's where Alshon Jeffrey makes his money. He's not a guy who works the middle of the field and gets 8 or 9 receptions for 64 yards or something like that. He's a guy down the sideline. He's a guy in the end zone. He's a big receiver that can really body up these smaller corners. Nolan Carroll struggles when the ball's in the air on deep passes. So I think it's a perfect matchup for a guy like Jeffrey with a strong arm quarterback like Jay Cutler. Because if you're going to beat the Eagles' defense, it's not going to be in the middle of the field with those linebackers, those defensive linemen dropping in coverage. We saw Benny Logan drop into his own cover 3 zone last week. So it's really interesting how they're using it. But they want their best players covering their other best players. The corners are not their best players. That's a way to exploit it for Alshon this week. I think he's an excellent play in tournaments, but he might even be worth using in cash games this week, simply because of the targets he's probably going to see against the Philadelphia Eagles.
Yeah, I don't have a problem with Alshon. I love Alshon, and the best thing about Alshon right now is that he's healthy. It's the best time to play him.
Absolutely.
When he's healthy, he's one of the 6 or 7 best fantasy receivers in the NFL. And like you said, the Eagles, dating back to last year, have been so bad against number 1 receivers. So Alshon should still. I know Kevin White saw a ton of snaps, but I think he saw more. I'm pretty sure he saw more snaps than Alshon. But Alshon is still going to see the majority of the targets. Kevin White is really raw right now, so Alshon against Nolan Carroll and company, I really, really like him. I think he is. I have it right in front of me. He is my 4th-ranked receiver for this week, so no qualms with Alshon. I actually have him 1 spot ahead of Julio Jones, believe it or not. So I'm with you on Jeffrey.
That's really telling for sure. Like you said, with a guy like Julio being ranked behind Alshon, it really tells you that Alshon has that matchup and has that ability to score a ton of points. Real quick on him before we move on to the next receiver. Last year, he averaged 12 targets per game at home, and that's where they are this week. And so I think this is going to be another one of those games where you look at Alshon and you wonder, you know what? It was such an easy play. Why didn't I play him? So for me personally, I'm just going to insert him into my lineups.
For sure. Someone I'm inserting in my lineups, regardless of the injury status in Denver, is going to be Emmanuel Sanders. C.J. Anderson at running back, he's going to be the chalk. He's going to have great opportunity, but it doesn't mean Emmanuel Sanders can't get his. Demaryius Thomas banged up right now. He doesn't know if he's going to play. Denver believes he will, so it's kind of interesting to see if he's out there. But either way, Sanders, the thing I like about, well, maybe the only thing I like about Denver's passing offense is where the ball is going. Last year, the combination of Sanders and DT combined to see 50% of the market share in targets. In week 1, it was 51%. So when they do throw the football, it's going to either Demaryius Thomas or Emmanuel Sanders. And we saw what Detroit did to this Colts secondary. It was just kind of short passes, and that's what Denver's going to do with Emmanuel Sanders. I think it's a perfect fit. Their cornerbacks are extremely banged up. I think Sanders, on PPR sites especially, great play. He's pretty cheap, too. For a guy that's in a relatively high total game, with Denver having a high team total, Sanders is only $6K. I love that price for him. I'm going to have him in a lot of lineups.
This is definitely something we're disagreeing on. We have a beef, Adam. I'm not on Emmanuel Sanders at all this week. I just think he's one of those players that, yes, he looked great when Peyton Manning was targeting him a lot a couple years ago. Yes, he could play more. Maybe if Mark Sanchez won that job, but the way that this Broncos offense is set up, I'm not sure I can use the second option in the passing game. That is, of course, if Demaryius Thomas plays, he would be number one if he's out. But I think he's the third option on that offense because C.J. Anderson is going to get a lot of carries, going to catch a lot of balls out of the backfield. So for me, I'm not sure I can spend the money like that on Sanders because at that price, you're going to need some return. Last week, I think what happened was he only get he got 10 DraftKings points, but I think what happened was I think people saw a lot of the issues he had with the fact that he doesn't necessarily win a ton outside. Trevor Siemian, Broncos quarterback, only threw the ball 26 times, and they were trailing for a lot of that game. So I don't think the game script is going to be a favorable one for a guy like Sanders. So for me, I got to stay away from him. Just seeing 8 targets last week, he's that number 3 option in that offense. So I just don't think I can go with him at that price with other guys in that potential price range that can succeed a lot better.
See, I think he's probably the preferred option over Demaryius Thomas in this offense. I think he fits what they want to do better, and Demaryius might not even play. I think he's gonna play at the end of the day, but he didn't even receive a second opinion yet on his injuries. So, if Thomas, doesn't play with that hip injury, do you have a little bit more interest in Sanders, or do you still think it's just a C.J. Anderson game, which it very well could be, but it also could be both.
Yeah, I think it's more of a C.J. Anderson game, but I think the main reason why I'm not on Sanders this week is even if you did want to play him, which I definitely don't think I will be doing, the problem is Michael Crabtree is just $100 more. So for me, I would rather use a guy like that, or even less, you can use Marvin Jones, Willie Snead on DraftKings pricing. So personally, I'm going to be off Sanders, but the third guy I'm sliding into my lineups, Jordan Matthews. My God, what a target hog that guy was last week. 14 targets. He only caught half of them, which is a lot less than an optimal ratio, and he still caught 114 yards and a touchdown. He dropped 2 or 3 passes as well. We know he has issues with his hands, but if he gets those hands right, he's looking at 10 or 11 catches last week. That's against the Browns, of course, who the Eagles were winning that game basically since the opening kickoff. This week, they get the Bears. Jordan Matthews is going to have a great matchup, regardless of who's covering him or trying to cover him, which I think is the most likely outcome in this game. Carson Wentz looked good last week. He faced a secondary that's not as good or not nearly as good as the rest of the teams in the NFL. So this is one of those weeks. I think Jordan Matthews is one of these players in cash games. It's a free square. 14 targets is not on accident. That was in a game script that did not favor the passing game. For me, I think he has potential in a close game to get more than that. So I'm always targeting targets. I know it's a double use of the word there, but it's going to be one of those things where, as my wide receiver 3, he is well worth it.
Yeah, he's not my favorite play, but like I talked about this in the podcast, he could be a dark horse top 7 candidate in terms of targets for the entire season. Wentz really locked in on one guy on Sunday, and now Zach Ertz is most likely going to be out this week and maybe the next couple weeks with a rib injury. So, like Matthews' floor could be 10 targets this game and the rest of the way. So, sign me up for that against an exploitable secondary that's banged up right now. I think Matthews is a fine option for sure, especially because like there's that receiving core was already bad enough, and now Zach Ertz is going to be out. Matthews, I think, like I said, should see at least 10 targets in this game, you got to think, right?
Yeah, I think the 10 targets at minimum is going to be one of the main reasons why he's an excellent play. But like you said, with Ertz out, I mean, the sky's the limit, really, especially if this game warrants a lot more passing than we think. Maybe the Bears take a 2-touchdown lead or something like that based on special team touchdown, or maybe there's a deep pass to Alshon, which I know we're both hoping for. That would be great. So if the game script goes his way, we're looking at a massive target share. And even if not, like you saw last week, 14 targets is well enough for a floor for me to consider in a game that doesn't necessarily favor the way that the passing game is supposed to be used.
Yeah, he's fine, especially when you look at. I think this will be not a high-scoring game, but not necessarily a low-scoring game either. And at the end of the day, sometimes you just got to look at guys who are going to see a lot of usage, and we've looked at guys who are far less talented than Jordan Matthews who are going to see a lot of targets in an offense. So I can't really fault Matthews. The only concern I have is maybe Wentz regresses a big way in his first road start. But it's not like he's going against Minnesota. It's not like he's going against Seattle. So I think at the end of the day, Matthews will be fine.
I agree. And looking at that price range, too, he could be lesser owned because we're seeing guys like T.Y. Hilton, Mike Evans, Golden Tate, Doug Baldwin, two of our favorites, and Eric Decker and Kelvin Benjamin, and even Larry Fitzgerald's cheaper. So there's a lot of guys in that price range that people will be using. And I'm hoping they just skip over Matthews because I would love to get him at a low ownership this week.
Yeah, for sure.
All right, now, next topic here. This is something that I've been looking forward to all week. I can't wait to discuss it. Adam loves AJ Green. I love Odell Beckham. Odell Beckham is going to be loved by basically everyone that makes the DFS lineup this weekend. But we're arguing who's going to be wide receiver one. Who do you have to have in your lineup? Adam, yours is AJ Green. Why? Convince me.
He's really good at football. You saw what he did to Revis. Whether you believe Revis is a top-notch corner still or not, it was still very impressive. And just he owns this team. Rich Rebar does great work for RotoWorld and among other sites. His past 5 meetings, Rebar points out, averaging 9 receptions for 130 yards on 14.5 targets. That's good for about 25 fantasy points per game over his last 5 games. He's been just money in the bank. He's going to see at least, I think, in this game, 40% of the Bengals' targets. And for the season, like I said, around 30%. They don't have anybody else. Dalton locks into A.J. Green. I don't think they'll be able to run the ball. I don't think the tight ends are a factor in this offense. I just think he's such a lock. And granted, let me just make this disclaimer that I'm not against Odell Beckham. Like, he's still the number 2 receiver for me in my rankings. He's going to be very highly owned, and for good reason, because he's going against a Saints secondary that's their top 3 corners are all, new compared to where they were last year. But I just think A.J. Green is going to be a little less owned. I think he has the same upside in this matchup, and it's probably going to see more targets than Odell Beckham with Sterling Shepard and Victor Cruz there. So for that reason, I give the bump a little bit to A.J. Green, but obviously both are going to be great. A.J. Green could have 200 targets this season at the end of the day, though.
Yeah, that sounds great. That's for sure. I know all those numbers you threw out at me is definitely making me move towards a little bit more of AJ Green shares. But I just think Odell Beckham is a free square this week. We talked about him before with the fact that he faces the Saints offense without Delvin Breaux. So for me, he's a free square. I think we touched on these top two receivers enough, and it's one of the reasons why I think you got to get both of them. So in order to fit,
if you can find value, I want to play both of them, and I'm going to play both of them.
Exactly.
There's some good value running backs this week too.
Exactly. Yeah, we will talk about that as well, so be sure to tune into that when we have the running back beef. But
Yeah.
The one thing is, if you want to have both of them, you're going to need a sleeper. So sleeper's a wide receiver, Adam. Who's your guy?
Yeah, so after the podcast and after doing research and all that, I am absolutely in love with Allen Hurns this week. He had a fine game against Green Bay. I think he had 4 for 75. I just think that he is going to go nuts against San Diego. Like I said in the quarterbacks beef, I love this game for fantasy. And if you look back at the games where Allen Robinson was going against a top-tier cornerback, that's when Allen Hurns really had his big games. You look back at last year, 2 meetings against the Colts where Vontae Davis was shadowing Allen Robinson. The first game, Hurns went 11 for a 116 and a touchdown. The second game, he only had 3 catches, but it went for 105 and a touchdown. There was a game against the Jets with Revis where Hurns went 5 for 122 and a touchdown. And this is a good matchup still, even without, the whole cornerback factor. You look at what San Diego did last week. They let Alex friggin' Smith have almost 400 passing yards. So that alone is good enough reason. And you look at his big play upside, his touchdown totals from last year are going to regress. He's not going to score 10 touchdowns again. But he's going to have his big games. According to ESPN last week, he averaged nearly 18 air yards per target. So what does that tell us? When he's getting targets, they're going to be down the field with big playability. Great tournament option. San Diego's a bad secondary, a bad defense. Like I said, they coughed up 5 20-yard passing plays in week 1. I just think this is a perfect spot for Allen Hurns. Not that I think Allen Robinson is going to get shut down, because he does have a lot of size advantage on Jason Verrett. But Jason Verrett is a very good corner. Allen Robinson will still probably have a very good game, but Allen Hurns, I think, can have a very good game as well, especially with Julius Thomas suffering an ankle injury. He's not 100% right now. At 5,700 or 5,400, excuse me, I love Allen Hurns. He's a top 28 receiver for me, which makes him wide receiver too, just about for me.
Yeah, it's a good point. You mentioned he was 5,400. Goes against that San Diego team that we talked about before with those small corners. That's a guy that you could fit into your lineups at a cheap salary and get that upside, like you said. He's one of these guys that really succeeds when Allen Robinson's facing a number one corner. But for me, my sleeper is quite cheap. He's a guy last year that didn't get a chance to play. And I think it was an upsetting thing for the Steelers offense, because could you imagine if he played with Martavis? That's Eli Rogers. I want to say, I know we just saw him for one game, but he kind of looked like baby out AB out there, didn't he?
A little bit, yeah. I like Eli Rogers, so keep going.
Yeah, he's very cheap, 4,100 on DraftKings. He's one of these guys that has a chance to catch a lot of balls, so I would only use him in PPR formats like DraftKings and rosters. On FanDuel, just half-point PPR. I don't think he necessarily fits the bill as well. Last week, he lucked into a touchdown. Ball just clanged off of Sammy Coates' chest, which happens a lot, unfortunately, and it just landed right in his hands. So I don't think that touchdown was something that was scripted. Obviously, it wasn't something that was trying to go his way, so you can't count on that. But he did see 7 targets. If Marcus Wheaton is out again, which very, very well could happen, Eli Rogers is going to be that third guy in the slot. Going against Cincinnati, we talked about last week. You mentioned Eric Decker was going to be playing in the slot, and he did, and he scored a touchdown. So we see a slot again with a guy like Eli Rogers. AB can succeed on the outside or the inside, so we don't have to worry about where he is. You know that's where the attention is going to be. They still have Sammy Coates as a big option. Jesse James is a big option. So that little guy in the middle could be a guy that Ben Roethlisberger really targets, and that for me is why I like Eli Rogers as a cheap guy. 4,100, then it allows me to fit those big guys, AJ Green and Odell. Are you looking at Rodgers as well?
Yeah, I have no problem with him. No beef at all. I really like Rodgers. This is a guy that the Steelers have liked since they drafted him, but he got hurt in the preseason last year and didn't play at all. So now that he's healthy, they're going to use him as the slot receiver. Even when Wheaton comes back, he's still going to play in the slot. He outsnapped Sammy Coates. He played about just under 70% of the snaps. So at that price point and a high-powered offense, I'm perfectly fine with Eli Rogers. These Cincinnati-Pittsburgh games aren't the low-scoring affairs they used to be. It's a 48.5 total. I project a lot of points in this game, and Eli Rogers showed me a lot. Even without the fluky touchdown, he had a good game. And you can maybe count on the ball not landing in the hands of Sammy Coates very often. So maybe he catches another one off of Sammy Coates' helmet or head or whatever.
That would be great. I would love for that to happen again. And when you use him as a sleeper guy, you can add in Odell Beckham and then AJ Green on DraftKings for those 3 receivers. It's a combination of 22,500. Now that sounds like a lot, but you can use 3 other receivers at middle price points like Brandon Marshall, Amari Cooper, and Randall Cobb. Those 3 are actually cost more than Odell, AJ Green, and Eli Rogers. So that's a good way to think about it. A guy that's a sleeper at 4,100 allows you to fit those top receivers without crushing your cap space. And we will talk about it again on a different beef where we discuss running backs. There are some sleepers. So if you can fit a sleeper receiver with some sleepers at other positions, it's really going to give you a chance to play those top 2 guys. So I think a sleeper wide receiver 3 is a big way to improve your lineups this week.
Yeah, for sure. I'm going to, tune into the running backs beef because you're going to need some of these sleeper running backs, these cheaper running backs to fit in AJ Green and Beckham, which is something I'm going to want to do this week because they both have extremely high floors and high ceilings in this matchup.
Absolutely. That essentially wraps up our wide receiver beef for week 3. Let's recap real quick. I know Adam likes AJ Green. We discussed that. He loves DeAndre Hopkins, and I can't disagree with him at GPP pick. And his third guy was Emmanuel Sanders, who we did disagree on. But I like Odell, as I think both of us do. I love Alshon Jeffrey this week against the Eagles. And Jordan Matthews, I think, is a lock for cash games. The 2 guys we discussed as sleepers, Allen Hurns and Eli Rogers. Going to be a bunch of those guys in our lineup this week. I love Hurns' upside. I love the fact that Eli Rogers has a high floor as a cheap option. So that's going to be an excellent way to improve our lineups as well. We talked about some different ways to use our number 1 receiver this week. Adam likes AJ Green. I like Odell. But I think we both agree there's a way to fit both of them. So We want to thank Rosters.com again for sponsoring this. It's been an excellent site to play on. I'm looking forward to playing on it again this week. And as always, you can see below us right now, you can use a promo code CURVE to get a $20 bonus on your initial deposit. So be sure to keep an eye on that. Look for the rest of the stuff we have up this week on RotoCurve. We're going to have we have a quarterback beef. We're going to have running back beef, some other ones, some tight end stuff. Adam has a ton of stuff coming. I have a piece up already. I have another one coming on Thursday where I discuss some facts you may not know about every game. It's going to be a great week again in week 2 in NFL DFS. So for Adam Pfeiffer, I'm Josh Kalachi. This has been the Daily Beef. Good luck, everyone.